Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Cradle News Roundup. My name is Tima Tayyim. I am social media director and content creator at the Cradle, and I am joined by columnist Sharmeen Narwani and writer and content creator Kareem Shami. So, with everything that's going on right now, I think what's taken precedence over everything is these immense scenes that we are seeing coming out of North Gaza and South Lebanon, where residents are returning to their homes after a brutal war on all fronts. Yesterday in South Lebanon, we saw residents defying the orders of the Israeli occupation forces and marching into their villages at several different points near the border with their bare bodies, and even in some cases like liberating peace villages, we saw troops withdrawing, and we actually saw the Lebanese armed forces trailing behind the residents, as the residents were the ones who again refused to stand down and refused to wait to enter. They were there from the early hours of the morning because it marked the end of the 60-day period and what was supposed to be the withdrawal of the Israeli forces. Now that's been extended, and we'll talk about that. But so we have seen withdrawal from several points. It's mainly in the eastern sector and a few other areas where the Israeli troops are still present. And we have between 100 killed and wounded. And these people were killed by the Israeli occupied forces simply for trying to return home. These were not, Hezbollah, but because they are the popular cradle of Hezbollah, the Israeli media will interpret anyone as Hezbollah and also will blame Hezbollah for exciting their people. And this is what the Israeli media tried to portray it as, provocations on Hezbollah's part by telling their people to go home, which is not the case. The case is that, these people will have it no other way, and they've been waiting for this moment. And despite being killed, despite being shot at, we saw scenes of, unarmed civilians, men and women, confronting Merkava tanks fearlessly. And it's difficult to see, but it's just yet another indicator and just another example of the fact that you will always lose against a popular resistance, because popular resistance comes from the people, and that always will be the case. Today in North Gaza, we also see hundreds of thousands returning to the north on foot, just like the Lebanese returned on foot. And this was with the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Netzarim corridor, which bisects the Gaza Strip, which we talked about so much on this show. After they were previously yesterday, the Israelis were holding up the return and refusing to withdraw from Netzarim over a crisis that took place concerning an Israeli captain, Arbil Yehud. And that was supposedly resolved now. The details aren't important, but Arbil Yehud and two others, if I'm not mistaken, will be released on Thursday. As part of the ceasefire and exchange deal between the Palestinian resistance and Israel. So we are seeing scenes where in Lebanon, this attempt, although the Israelis are still attempting to do this attempt to have, Israel wanted to impose this buffer zone in South Lebanon and prevent the return completely of residents to the front villages. And they failed in this making this military zone, and the Israelis are not happy about that. In Gaza, we also see a failure of the general's plan, which the Israelis claimed they were not implementing, but we saw it before our eyes that this was indeed what was being implemented. And as I was saying from the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, there will be no second Nakba. And there was no second Nakba, and no matter how much people tried to implement their plans for ethnic cleansing of northern Gaza and the building of settlements, in both cases, in Lebanon and in Gaza, residents were not supposed to return. The Israelis wanted to keep northern Gaza empty, not just to defeat or deal with Hamas, but even after the war ended. And the same is the case in Lebanon, where, we can't talk as if things have finished. Because as we saw yesterday, the White House announced an extension now of this period, which implies that there will be a delay of the withdrawal of Israeli forces. These objectives, we have the northern Gaza. Many people never would have thought that they would be seeing the residents of North Gaza return to North Gaza, or the residents of South Lebanon returning. And these are the failures of the Israeli army once again, completely. And this is points of strength, even with all the difficulties in this situation, with all the loss. Yes, there were many things that are up for debate, many things that we could criticize, but these are points of strength that cannot be debated, and we need to give them their credit, because these are scenes that many people thought they'd never see. You can't lose in such you can't win. In such a situation, this is with everything that's happened. The fact that the northern settlers have not returned to their homes in northern occupied Palestine, but the residents of northern Gaza and South Lebanon have, it speaks volumes, even if there isn't too much light shed on that right now. So I am sure you guys saw the scenes, and now we're having really crazy scenes coming out of northern Gaza. We even see the resistance on the ground receiving residents in northern Gaza. In South Lebanon and northern Gaza, there are many similarities, but there are also many differences. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, what is it that's been taking place in South Lebanon?
First, we have to know that the demands of the Israelis, that they want an empty south of Lebanon and an empty north of Gaza, that's what they demanded for them to go back to their settlements. And both the Israeli army failed to accomplish. And we saw hours after the ceasefire is over, people from the south flooded to their villages, although there was a risk, and we saw that around 24 people were killed and 134 were injured. And today, till now, one was shot by the Israelis and he died, unfortunately, and we have 7 injured. So for me, as a Southern, I understand that, because they lost their houses, they lost their lives and their beloved ones' life, and they only have this land, and this land is their dignity. I know this word is not often used in the West, but pride and dignity is very important for the Lebanese people, and especially for the Southerns. And to regain back their dignity is to go back to their villages and to their land, although this might cost them their lives, and that's what's happening. Unfortunately, Sima said that they might extend this ceasefire till the 18th of February. Previously, on our other podcast, we saw and we talked about this, and we said that the deal was weak, and the deal was made by Biden and the Lebanese government and Israel, and now there's no Biden, and now we are facing Trump, the administration of Trump, which is pro-Zionist, and we don't know what will happen next. But of course, what happened, will accelerate the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from South Lebanon, because if they didn't withdraw in this way, they will withdraw under fire and under missiles, because there's no other way. We already lost a lot in this war. And of course, the same applies to Gazans. It's the same thing. They lost everything, and they want to return to their houses, no matter the cost is.
Yeah, on early Sunday morning, everyone is waiting for this, D-Day, if you will. And of course, as we had seen at the end of the wars, the declaration of the 60-day ceasefire agreement, immediately, Southerners were waiting for the clock to tick, to the exact time to start their journey to the south. And in this case, in the days leading up to it, we were wondering how the ceasefire agreement would be achieved, or rather the 60-day withdrawal of Israeli troops, because they were not withdrawing. They were continuing to bulldoze and detonate and kill, and we're even moving into new towns. Now, nobody really addressed it. We heard things like the French president Emmanuel Macron on the international stage imploring the Israelis to abide by the ceasefire agreement and imploring the Americans to make sure they did. But the French, as we've seen in many scenarios, they do a lot of they make a lot of statements for public consumption and have zero clout, as we can see. And then as the day progressed and Israel continued to be past the hour of the expiration of the 60-day term of the deal, continued to be in these areas, we have a terse statement issued by the White House saying simply, the arrangement between Lebanon and Israel, monitored by the United States, will continue to be in effect until February 18, 2025. It's interesting because it almost seemed like the Americans just took all cards out of the Lebanese hands, the hands of Lebanese authorities, went ahead and made a declaration and forced their Lebanese proxies, because that's essentially what this newly selected Lebanese government is, headed by former Army Commander Michel Aoun, who's now President of the Republic, and the selection by Parliament of Nawaf Salam as Prime Minister, who has not formed his cabinet yet. It basically took away the agency of the Lebanese government, put them in a bind. What were they going to do? Counter and criticize the American declaration? No. So, we didn't have statements from Lebanese authorities until caretaker Prime Minister, who's still the caretaker, even though there's a new Prime Minister elected, because the new Prime Minister hasn't formed his cabinet yet. The caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati then said, yes, there is an extension of the ceasefire till the 18th of February, which was bizarre. He's pretty much the only Lebanese authority that's gone on the record. The presidency's office, Joseph Aoun's office, just merely tweeted last night, that the media office of the presidency of the Republic says there's no truth to the news about Israel informing Lebanon that it will remain at 5 border points for 15 days. What we have just continuously seen in these 2 ceasefires going on simultaneously in Gaza and Lebanon is Israel is not agreement pliant. It's a term we use a lot at the Cradle because we're always parsing through agreements, U.S. sanctioned, U.S. written agreements that the parties, basically the U.S. side, backtracks on. And so this is what we're seeing in this case. Now, we saw the Israelis withdraw from Gaza, from points in Gaza during the first phase of that ceasefire agreement within days. They just up and left. And 61 days on, in southern Lebanon, they're unable to retreat. Now, you're right, Seema, the Lebanese civilians have basically acted like an army would, have gone in and made way for the Lebanese army, as you said, who followed them for protection, I'm not sure what, to remain in these areas, and have tried to impair UNIFIL from leaving areas that they should be guarding, to secure the south. But UNIFIL is afraid of Israeli firepower and has tried to withdraw on Lebanese civilians, not allowed them to in some areas. We're seeing something quite extraordinary, that the newly selected Lebanese government, the Lebanese army, are unable to implement the terms of the ceasefire deal. And it is ordinary Lebanese people who are showing them the way. And really what this has shown, it's something we've talked about in the podcast when the ceasefire agreement went into effect, and Hezbollah refused to respond to ceasefire violations. Hezbollah, as we know, was not a signatory to the deal that the Lebanese government was. Hezbollah was essentially saying, we're going to step aside and see how you handle this. And we're going to give you full authority to do so. We're not going to intervene. Which is exactly what happened. And I think these 60 days have shown the Lebanese people, the Lebanese nation, the international community, that in fact there is nobody who can counter the Israelis other than resistance. Neither the state nor the army is able to do so. Now, what Israel does when it violates deal terms is immediately try to shift the blame to its opponent. They've done that with Hamas, saying Hamas has violated terms of the agreement, when in fact it hasn't, and Hamas has clarified these things, but, Western media runs with the Israeli headlines. But in this case, one of the main terms of the agreement was that Israel would withdraw from areas as the Lebanese army moved in. And then what Israel would complain about in meetings with the group meant to oversee the ceasefire, which is basically the Americans, the French, the United Nations. What Israel would argue is that the Lebanese army have not taken their posts. No, they haven't taken their posts because the Israelis have not allowed them into towns, villages, and areas, okay, according to the timetable set up to do so. So it's not that the Lebanese army is late on anything. It's the Israeli army keeps delaying. And as we saw today, when they saw, thousands of civilians walk in to their towns and villages despite the new February 18th arbitrary deadline, was that Israeli forces retreated often to the borders of the villages and towns and under discussion. And now, in some cases, at 9:30 this morning, the Israeli army spokesman claimed the army is redeploying in various locations in southern Lebanon. It's not clear, the story. We're watching it very keenly here on the ground in Lebanon, and it's not absolutely clear what's happened. We do know that Israeli forces have continued to use firepower against civilians. So far today, 1 killed and I think 7 injured per official Lebanese government accounts. Yesterday, 24 civilians were killed, were murdered, okay? Women, children, teenagers.
Soldiers as well.
Soldiers, wow.
Paramedics.
Lebanese soldiers and paramedics. And I think over 134 were injured. So we're going to see how Israel handles. I used to argue that why don't Palestinians, all of them, Gaza and the West Bank, East Jerusalem, just walk home? What can Israel do? They just walk home. And today in Gaza and in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, we're seeing scenes of Lebanese and Palestinians just walking home. And I think there's kind of a limit to what Israel can do when faced by mass civilian movements, unarmed, okay, who just want to go home.
Yeah. And I think also it's not that they didn't think that people would be killed. They knew that they would be killed, and that this is the price if you actually want to return home or to your homes, or even if your homes are no longer there, to return, to where your home was. I mean, it's not like they wasn't out of ignorance, like, oh, let's march in they were like, bitterly surprised that people would be killed. They knew this would happen. And it's not easy to see. But this is, it wouldn't have, I don't think they would have been able to return home in this way had this not happened. So it may not sound great to a lot of people, but I feel like this is the price. And it's not the first time in history that this has happened, actually. So,
but this just adds, fuel to Israel's humiliation, not just the government and the army, but its citizens too, who are reluctant and scared to return to the north, because that's really not their land. They don't have the attachment of the Southerners. They don't have the attachment of the Palestinians in Gaza, who are willing to weather all kinds of things, and refuse to bend. And, today seeing Hamas fighters in their uniforms standing upon platforms in northern Gaza with loudspeakers, and seeing massive billboards go up overnight at the entry of Gaza City and other northern sites, welcoming Palestinians back to their homes. I mean, you just think, Israel, the West, has sort of like spun the whole Gaza genocide into we basically weakened the resistance there beyond anything, and yet day after day we are seeing not only the resilience of the fighters, they're everywhere. They're in crisp, ironed uniforms. They're printing things that you can only do at big printing facilities, right? Where are these facilities, right? They're putting them up on billboards. I mean, they're not missing a beat. When the 4 Israeli female soldiers were released, it was on a major stage, right? And there were sort of posters on the ground of the Israeli flag and the American flag that Palestinians in Gaza were trampling over.
Right.
This was a major production. This is something that you don't typically see in the resistance axis that is not particularly media savvy. I mean, sometimes you see from the Iranians where overnight when something happens, a big new banner goes up in Palestine Square, in Tehran. But this is completely, I think, shocking and to most people to see that they have capabilities in all ways. Not just the military capability intact, but actually the things you do to govern the territory. So, of course, the next steps for the Israelis and the Americans and their Arab proxies will be to try to usurp governance in Gaza and install their own people. I just don't see how they can, especially when we see the scenes of regular Palestinians cheering on the resistance as though they were, they're grateful to them, despite the bombardment and destruction of most of Gaza.
Yeah, look, for the most part, yes, they are so fully supportive of their resistance because, their people are the resistance. And a lot of people tried to play on this idea that people have increasingly turned against Hamas in Gaza. And I think it's really come back to bite them in the face. I mean, I'm sure there are people who cursed Hamas throughout the war in Gaza. And we can't say if we were in the same situation, we may have done the same. But for the most part, I think that support for Hamas hasn't changed. And opponents and Israel.
Well, I think it's even grown since the ceasefire. It's grown and spread because of the dignity and because of the show they put on as well. And we've seen this in the West Bank as well, where actually Hamas fighters have come out cheering with the people. And that has just knocked off even more popularity points for the U.S. and Israel-backed Palestinian Authority. I'm curious what you guys think. Ketty, maybe you can speak to this too about, people thinking, well, don't be too victorious yet because Israel could start up again. There are wars on both fronts in no time. And I'd like to point out, having put the question on the table, that Israel kind of hasn't stopped since the Gaza ceasefire and the Lebanese one. It has moved a lot of resources to decimate major cities, refugee camps, and towns and villages in the West Bank. It cannot turn off its killing machine. I mean, we are seeing evil as we've never seen evil outside of, the movie theater in our lifetimes. So what do you think? Will the wars on multiple fronts restart, or is there deterrence? Is there something that's going to hold the Israelis back?
I think in Gaza, it's very difficult for the war to reignite. I think politically the agreement was very good. The Palestinians and Hamas were very intelligent in the agreement. And we can say that somehow they have allies, which are Turkey and Qatar. Yesterday, there were a problem emerged in Gaza, and Qatar fixed it in 3-4 hours. To be honest, and that's what happened. And of course, we are seeing what's happening in Gaza. We see armed groups from Hamas. We see Hamas leaders are among people, and they are walking, and Israel is not targeting them. And of course, I think one of the major things that Israel accomplished before the ceasefire is to cut Gaza into 2 pieces due to Natsarim corridor. and they pushed all the Gazans to the south. Now they are returning. So in the short term or even in the long term, I don't see that the war in Gaza will reignite. But in Lebanon, the deal was very weak. Nobody can see Hezbollah. If anybody who's like this, the Hezbollah went to see his village, he is being targeted. And we saw what happened yesterday. 24 people died in Lebanon. I heard you and I heard Sima, and I understand you. And I am from the south, but I don't know how this happened. We have many layers to prevent this. We have the Lebanese army, we have the UN, UNIFIL, we have the Lebanese government, we have we have the media. The media should tell people, no, you can't go there. I don't know how these people pass, and we are still in the middle of a war, although there's a ceasefire, but it's a war zone, and this happened. So I'm afraid they will continue in Lebanon, but in Gaza, I think that deal is done, and Gazans, they have, as I said, somehow they have allies. Lebanon, we have zero allies. We only take orders. Since I was young, each politician takes order, and I never saw a politician who works for Lebanon. So I think even there's politicians that will agree to annex South Lebanon and give it to Israel just to not to have headaches from the West. So I'm convinced of this. So I don't know what will happen in South Lebanon. As I said, on the ground, what's happening in Gaza, it tells us that the war will not reignite.
The Israelis are already talking about let's get phase 1 over and we can restart in phase 2. So I really don't know about that. Netanyahu, we have to watch Netanyahu's situation personally. His situation, because it often seems that Netanyahu tries to externalize Israel's problems, i.e. to start a war, when things are not going for him domestically, or well for him domestically.
But I don't think it's up to Netanyahu now. It's about the army. You told the army to withdraw, although they got checkpoints, they did all this. Now they tell them to come back. And the Israelis, I don't know why they are so sensitive. Many of them will resign. You know what I mean? I don't think he's ready for this.
Yes, but they're resigning. The head of the army resigned, and others have resigned now in the last few days after the Gaza ceasefire was struck. But that also could suggest that Netanyahu will put, warmongers in to lead the army. And so things are not certain there. I don't think the climate internationally, and including with Israel's allies, is conducive to the Netanyahu government restarting a war. I don't think any of its allies want this to continue, but Israel and this particular government does exactly what it wants, as we've seen. Can Trump himself make such a difference? I don't think so. I think when Trump goes in and shuts down Netanyahu and gives him an order which he has to follow, Trump then rewards Netanyahu in another way.
Like with the 2,000-pound bombs.
Exactly.
And maybe with the West Bank or something, we don't know. Like, we don't know what he's, accepted in exchange for stopping in Gaza, because it was so clear just 2-3 months ago that there would be no stopping on Gaza.
Yeah. On this front, there's a lot of waiting to do. I agree with you, Karim, that it's funny how Hamas seems way stronger than Hezbollah at this moment. But I think it should be mentioned that Hamas fully controls the Gaza Strip, whereas Hezbollah is only one component of the Lebanese public fabric, and only one component of its multi-sectarian, multifaceted government. And
very different conditions. There's such different conditions. And I understand the perception, but also just everything about Hamas is different than Hezbollah. But I do understand this perception.
I'm not talking about how they fight. Politics. The 60 days was a very, very stupid thing. I don't know who agreed on it. Until now, on the news, we have no idea about it. And we are talking, me, Sima, And
You know what, though?
if you into the news, we don't know where's Israel. We don't know where they withdraw. The government is like blackout, as if there's nothing happening. Even people that are with Hezbollah, they are reporting in like specific places. So this is very crucial. And I'm talking about politics, yani. I'm not talking about firepower or the fighter on the ground. The leader who is taking decision in Hamas, he's a very smart person, while in Lebanon, he's not so much, unfortunately.
I think there are different approaches, and also the thing is you're saying politics, but in these situations and in these battles, it's the military achievements that translate into politics. So if you're saying this failure, then that's also because of certain military failures.
Yeah, but Israel, like 60 days ago, they agreed on this deal. Do you think if Hezbollah pressured or anybody pressured, no, make them 50 days, Israel wanted to have stopped the war?
It just makes me wonder what would have happened if the Gaza ceasefire was struck first. Nobody in Lebanon would have accepted a 60-day withdrawal deadline. It would have been a whole different thing, because it's very clear the Israeli troops can leave their shit like the Americans did in Afghanistan and in parts of Iraq and just leave. You can just leave, and that's not what's happened. In the end, the Israelis will be out of all Lebanese territory, okay? It's my view that the Israelis will be out of all Syrian territory. There's an argument they make for, it's the Turks are now saying, look, the conditions of, that Israel was facing before, meaning a strong Iranian resistance axis, Hezbollah presence in Syria, no longer is the case. So they cannot argue that they need more territory. And here's the thing, a state that after 76 years, is it 76 years? 77 years coming up to, still doesn't have defined borders. There's no buffer zone that will protect you any more than the last ones did. The state has a fundamental problem in its being. This is why it never feels safe enough, okay? There is no, it can stretch to the Tiberias, Euphrates, and the Nile, and it will still not be safe because of the fundamentals of the state. It's not a normal state. It's an ideological, right-wing, messianic project imposed by foreigners on this region. There is no buffer zone that will provide safety for Israelis. There is no border that will be sufficient. So they will be pushed out of Syria eventually. They will be pushed out of Lebanon much sooner than that. Eyes on Gaza as to what they're going to do. What's interesting is everything that Israel has done while it's controlled, where their troops have controlled territories in these places, can be undone within 24 hours by destroying the Israeli infrastructure and the reconnaissance and satellite and intelligence gathering equipment that they've installed in all these places, and the booby traps. So I don't know. It's just a play. It's a show, a theater for the Israelis to placate their public. But if you're not particularly attached to land, you just happen to land in this village in the north of Israel near the border with Lebanon, and you're being asked to go home and rebuild there, why would you? You'd stay in central Israel, So you see where you were talking about perception earlier, that this is just a perception. It's not how it really is. This is so important. What I've seen since the end of the war in Lebanon is, it's not so much the end of the war. What happened when the Syrian government fell? Massive perception change among the Lebanese, among resistance supporters, that the entire axis had folded. It was psychological warfare at its best, because when you parse the actual facts versus the perception, you still see that Israel was unable to achieve its war goals which was to defeat the resistance, the Lebanese resistance, and to get its Jewish settlers back into their homes in the north, right? Those were not achieved. Those are the facts. Everything else is psychological warfare, meant to sway you, meant to weaken you, meant to deter you, meant to defeat you. So, keep your eye on the facts. Same goes for Gaza. Israel's war goals were to safeguard the settlements around the Gaza Strip and have people return safely to Jews return safely to their homes in these settlements. It was to annihilate Hamas, okay?
And build settlements, ideally,
Well, this was not a stated war goal. In that case...
Murder was the ethnic cleansing.
Israel was defeated there. And even on their unstated war goals, which was to basically annex and build settlements in the north of Gaza and depopulate the Gaza Strip of at least 1 million or so Palestinians, if not all of them, they failed in that. So look at the facts. Right now, Israel is reeling. Israelis are asking every single day, and you can read this in the Hebrew press, every single day, what did we fight for? What did we lose so many soldiers for? Why do we have tens of thousands injured? For what? We didn't achieve one stated war goal, nor did we achieve the unstated ones. We have lost. That's what the Israelis are saying, okay? And Hamas did psychological warfare where it prepared these stages and the paraphernalia and the gift bags and the, Israeli flags to stomp on and their ironed, perfect uniforms and their military parades. They did perfect psychological warfare on the Israelis in a way that Hezbollah hasn't yet, okay? So everything is a perception in Lebanon. It's taken hold, granted, but if you peel those layers of perception away and look at the facts, Israel has lost.
Yeah. No, I just have a couple of things I wanted to say before you, Karim. I mean, again, comparing Hamas with Hezbollah, for me personally, Hamas is always going to be on a different level because this is a besieged and occupied people. Of course, Hamas is going to use all means available. Of course, Hamas is going to be as closed an organization as possible. Of course, Hamas is going to know after decades of experience how to play on the Israeli psychology. It's not a surprise to me. A lot of people have this perception that, the shallow perception that okay, Hezbollah is much more strong than Hamas militarily. Therefore, this outcome, they're not being able to comprehend it. But for me, it makes perfect sense that Hamas would be able to come out of this with an image of more strength than Hezbollah has to many people. And then the thing you said about Syria, you're right that the fall of Syria contributed to the image of the defeat of Hezbollah. We even had the white men having nervous breakdowns on TV, like Scott Ritter and George Galloway. They're like, we gave up on the Arabs. And it's all over and whatever. And we talked about this, me and Karim, before. Actually, Hezbollah's mistakes do not come from their lack of weapons. Hezbollah's mistakes, strategic mistakes, come from certain bad decision making. So when I think of Syria falling, I don't think it's that big of a deal right now. I think weapons can still come through. They're paying the tribes. If they pay those HTS monkeys enough, they'll be able to get weapons through. Hezbollah's problem is not about the lifeline of the resistance is gone. I'm not downplaying Syria's role as the strategic debt.
No, it was a psychological blow. This is what I'm saying. I noticed this in Lebanon. People were fine after the ceasefire here. For some reason, when Syria fell, and the Israeli army moved in there, it felt like the entire axis collapsed to the Lebanese, and there were no further ways to degrade the enemy because it was a clean sweep for them, which is not at all the case. Also, I want to remind people that another part of Hamas's psychological warfare is these astounding images, we've seen of Mohammed Sinwar, the martyred Yahya Sinwar's brother, and Mohammed Daif, the commander of the Qassam brigades, emerging after the ceasefire agreement was struck. These are people core to the Hamas military plans in the Gaza Strip for the past 15, 16 months and even further, in the planning of Al-Aqsa flood operation, etc. This was a real blow to the Israeli military. The Israelis like to act like they have all kinds of intelligence that we don't know about, and they simply don't. In Gaza, you could see. In Lebanon, it was questionable because they managed to get all of the Hezbollah combat.
Yeah, Lebanon was different.
Yeah, it was, and which suggests that there was more infiltration in Lebanese society, whereas in Gaza, as you said, a besieged strip, they were not able to penetrate in the same way, or even discover most of the tunnels, right? I'm sure their big poster printing houses are underground. What?
Because they were using pen and paper. Yani, Al Jazeera documentary showed the moment that they declared October 7, there was a prepaid paper, okay, and they just filled up the date, you know what I mean, and the name of the operation. So this is...
Yeah, and there's something we should... So the resistance axis is still very much there. Let's just say that right now, the leaders, the strong members of the axis, whereas yesterday was Iran, was Hezbollah, today are, I think in people's minds, are Yemen and Hamas, or the Palestinian resistance, because obviously it's Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other groups as well, other factions as well. So this is how it stands today. You absolutely, however, cannot write off Iran and Hezbollah. Hezbollah will turn itself around in whatever way, and Iran still has everything it had at the beginning of this conflict and war at its disposal. It just, I guess intends to use it in more inflamed scenarios, and don't forget it has Donald Trump back in the White House that it has to contend with, and the Israelis want that war with Iran no matter what.
Yeah, but Trump will only last for like three and a half years. I don't think that's a concern for a country, but I'm concerned.
It is 4 years, by the way. It's not 3.5, it's 4 years. A lot can happen in 24 hours in this region, let alone
it's 4 years.
4 years is not insignificant, Kenny.
Yeah, it's insignificant for age of a country, and you can defend a country for 4 years. It's not a big deal. But the problem that I always talk about is for me Hezbollah. They have to get younger people. They have to get rid of the old people, because unfortunately, as we saw, they did mistakes here. They did huge mistakes, and they are still ruling Hezbollah, and that's what we know. So they have to acknowledge this, and they have to recruit and hand leadership for younger people that understand Israel more, that understand technology, that understand how people can be penetrated, and who read more foreign news, because currently, for instance, me and Sima, more than once, we felt what will happen from the Hebrew news, and we didn't see any action from Hezbollah, and then such things happen, including the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah.
To be fair, the largest amount of fluent Hebrew speakers in Lebanon are employed by Hezbollah. They do follow the foreign news. One could argue that don't follow the foreign news, act more like Ansarallah, who haven't been propagandized.
Sorry, just to clarify for the right. Yeah, foreign news, I don't mean CNN and this stuff. No, there is people who are very close to Netanyahu's government and to the cabinet of Netanyahu that usually they release some news. These are the people that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about CNN and Al Jazeera.
It's a very delicate thing. Hebrew media is a mix of real things and fake things. And so people really like to reduce it. They'll be like, oh, you're spreading the enemy's propaganda, blah, blah, blah. When it's sometimes they're actually telling the truth. You have to know what to use and what not to use.
For instance, when Israel made an operation in North Lebanon on the borders with Syria, and they went there with helicopters and they bombed a Hezbollah facility inside Syria. Hezbollah media said no, and the Israelis said yes. And after 4 or 5 months, there were footages of this. And plus,
Well, that's the typical Iranian denial.
yeah, and for instance, when Hezbollah said that they sent drones and they killed 22 people inside Tel Aviv, people can go back in the videos last year. I said, no, this didn't happen. Although Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah himself went and said it. And there's something wrong. Somebody was lying to Sayyid Hassan. There's a problem in the structure that should be fixed, and young people should be recruited. These people that were in the 80s, okay, thank you, goodbye. Now we need young people. That's a huge problem.
Look, I don't think like how the resistance reforms is anything we're going to know about or have any impact on, or even our views, like the ones you described, even correct. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are talking about that. A lot of people talk about whether Naim Qassem could ever be. I mean, to be fair, it's hard to replace someone like Hassan Nasrallah, to step into those shoes and fill them.
But you can't even know
is maybe not right. There are people who've talked about having a military person be secretary of the general of the Lebanese resistance as opposed to a cleric. Those things will be decided, I'm sure, ably by their own people. I think it's experience and ideas and strategy or strategic thinking that should define these things, not age or anything else. And
I think age is
only wait and see what emerges.
For me,
age is important in the sense that if you believe that Hezbollah's hits were caused by technology failures, and you think you need a more technologically astute youth to come in and add those ranks. I mean, they can, to be honest, they can just fill in the ranks of their that part of the organization, not the leadership. I mean, I'm just saying, it's not so simple to say the next person needs this, and this. They are looking at the organization from the inside. They're having a lot of opinions come to them, not just by key Hezbollah leaders, but their allies in the region and their supporters, who they're very close to. So there's a lot of feedback coming to them, and we'll see what comes next.
It's the approach that needs to change. I understand what you mean when you talk about age, Karim, but when I see people like Mohammed Daif and Yahya Sinwar, who is 61, I don't think it has anything to do with age.
Yeah.
It has to do something with age, just to clarify, because I didn't
Then look at Palestine.
I'm not thinking about this and said it now. I've thought about this for weeks and weeks. So the problem is that the leadership of Hezbollah were all people that created Hezbollah in the 80s. They did their job. Bye-bye. You did a very good job in the 90s and the 80s until 2000 and 2006. Now you're not doing a good job. Bye-bye, got new people. So why I'm saying this, Trump is like in his 80s, okay? But the United States is powerful. Why? Because there's people under him who's like taking care of things. He's only the hand. That's why I ask you, what do you mean by the new by Naim Qassem? Because Naim Qassem is old. Okay, I don't care, but is he like supervising everything like as Hassan Nasrallah used to do? This is a huge problem, because we knew that Sayyid Hassan was like the head of the resistance in Iraq, which is for me is very bad. In Syria, which is also very bad, in Lebanon, and in other places. He's under. He can't do this. This is sorry, let me continue. The one under him was Naim Qassem, and the one under him was Safiuddin, and they are all old people. And also we saw the leaders that were conducting the operations in the Eastern Front and Western Front, and they were assassinated. These are old people from the 80s. And also, Shukr, when he died, he's an old man. He's an old man with old mentality. There's a big difference. These people are with old mentality. Maybe this is the correct where to stay. We need people with a new mentality that understand not strategic patient as shit, okay? You have to act. This is different places, okay?
Okay.
You were
Just to
strategic
say-
patients to build up power. They build up power from 2006, 2025, now 24. We didn't see this power. It went like this. And again, I just want to say something. Sima said it at the beginning. This was the only way to liberate the South yesterday, and 24 people died. No, in my mentality, missiles should liberate the South. Missiles should hammer Israel and the South of Lebanon, where there is Israelis, in 4 a.m. yesterday. That's how the Israeli will go out, not as what happened yesterday. That's my own mentality. People might agree, people might not agree. People will tell me, oh, look at this 1, 2, 3, 100 people might die, only 24 died. No, I will not listen to you, because I listened to you since 18 years and nothing was correct. So that's what I'm saying.
It's amazing that they say women are so emotional. They shouldn't be in politics of decision making. Right, Carrie?
Yeah, because men are very logical.
Anyway,
As you're saying, like, just who cares what happens in response? Let's just fire missiles, let missiles rain down on them. Of course, Israel can be destroyed in one day. A few hundred missiles. Hold on, we discussed that before. The question is also, why not at what time? Now, please, again, consider what we discussed earlier, that Hezbollah is not in the same situation as Hamas, because Hamas completely controls the Gaza Strip. Hezbollah is only a part of the fabric of Lebanon, and it's socially and politically. And also note that Naim Qassem is kind of known as one of the two principal Hezbollah leaders who covers the domestic political front. He has relations with all parties. He has many times mediated and open discussions with the various factions, etc., inside Lebanon. It's very clear to me that in this war, Hezbollah very much considered what Lebanon was experiencing, what the Lebanese thought. I mean, that is a major constraint. You're not gonna go all existential on your enemy when you're worried about your neighbor. That is to Hezbollah's credit, as well as an explanation for why it didn't do more or it didn't do better. Okay, so if Hezbollah's focus is there, it doesn't matter. Organization-wide, it doesn't matter if you bring in younger, more savvy, more strategic-minded people. Hezbollah will always have to deal with the Lebanese body politic rather than go on its own. The only time I think we can expect for Hezbollah to put aside, all these considerations is when things actually become existential for the organization. And Hezbollah hasn't moved that way because it has not viewed the Israeli threat as existential. It knows that it still has levers which it exercised to contain the threat. It was Israel that wanted the ceasefire with Lebanon, not the other way around. It was Israel that pursued the ceasefire with Lebanon, with the Americans, and not the other way around. And what transpired after that, Syria, etc., was just a bonus gift for the Israelis propaganda-wise. So let's see where things go. I think now maybe we should talk a little bit about the fact that Lebanon still doesn't have a government. It's worth talking about what's happening in Lebanon despite the ceasefire, despite the violations of the ceasefire, despite the selection of a U.S.-backed presidential candidate, and then the parliamentary selection of a U.S.-backed prime minister. The government still has not been formed. And I also think one of Hezbollah's considerations now is what the formation of the government will look like, because there have been many promises made by Joseph Aoun and the deal to secure his presidency with Hezbollah, with Amal, and other groups that they would in fact get to name the new commander of the Lebanese army and decide who the finance minister would be. These things are not clear yet. There's a lot of horse trading still going on behind the scenes. Everybody wants a piece of the pie, basically to forestall their opponents from getting more, So this could continue for a really long time. I think we hope it doesn't, because I think then everybody will know where they actually stand with this new government, okay? There's been a lot of promises and broken promises already in a very short period. We need to see how the government is formed, I think, for the resistance and its allies to decide how to move ahead. So that is something that plays into this, bogus new extension of a ceasefire.
Yeah. I mean, look, I feel like there's uncertainty when it comes to both Lebanon and Gaza, but there's uncertainty in different ways. And I think that when we go through wars that are this brutal, it's only natural that things will be uncertain and certain concessions will be made. Like in the case of Lebanon, we really don't know what will happen with the extension. We really don't know what the timeline is going to look like. Are they going to extend again? Are they?
Well, I do think
the government, the formation of the government, what will it look like? Will it be in Hezbollah's interest? And then even in the case of Hamas, who has totally defeated Israel in Gaza, there are concessions that they've made that we don't know about. We've seen all the release of these prisoners who have been in prison for decades, and some of them are being deported outside of Palestine, and the media isn't focusing on that because it's not a very nice thing to focus on. But when you think in the position of the Israelis, both in Lebanon and in Gaza, it makes sense that the Israelis would not repeat the same mistakes. Like in 2006, they just did the 1701 thing and left Hezbollah to its own devices. Why would Israel repeat that same mistake? Or in 2011, when Yahya Sinwar was released in the prisoner exchange in which over 1,000 were released and none of them were deported or sent outside, why would Israel repeat those same mistakes?
So
it makes sense these things would be, that you lose some, you win some, you lose some. The siege won't be lifted on Gaza. The prisons might not be completely emptied. There's even an uncertainty about who will rule Gaza, because it looks like Hamas will always be the deep state, but Hamas has also, in a way, kind of expressed its willingness to give up rule of Gaza directly. So we don't even know who's going to rule Gaza. We don't know what's going to happen in Lebanon. But what we do know is that Israel has failed in its military objectives. This is what we do know. Even after like 16 months of genocide in Gaza, and the prisoners being released was a big priority for the Palestinian resistance. So I just think that this uncertainty comes with seeing victories.
That's how things roll in West Asia. With concessions from the Axis, come concessions from the Israelis, come concessions from the Americans. We did not anticipate that a Gaza ceasefire would actually manage to have the Israelis withdraw from the Netzarim corridor, from the Rafah crossing, from northern Gaza. Those are major Hamas gets, okay, which suggests to me Hamas's strength. This is also another parallel with Hezbollah right before the ceasefire. Right before the ceasefire, Hamas's operations, military operations, were on before a scale unseen in this war. They just, went from 0 to 100 in areas that Israel had thought it had cleared, increased in intensity and frequency before the ceasefire with Lebanon. The Sunday before, Hezbollah hit Israel with an intensity, Israeli cities, Israeli military targets, Israeli towns and cities with an intensity that it had not demonstrated during the entire war. So these are not collapsed organizations by any stretch. They decided to take the peace for the interim, for many reasons that are not necessarily known to us, but are, fairly obvious: to regroup, to reassess, to reorganize, to re-strategize, to rearm, many considerations. But they showed before both ceasefires that they were completely able to go over and beyond what the Israelis had ever experienced by them in the previous many, many months of the war. As you said, Seema, there are many things that are going to change and develop in not just the months and weeks and days, but even hours ahead. The Israelis have said there's going to be another American statement about the ceasefire imminently today. So as we film this podcast, Karim, this ain't over. Okay, this is a part of the war. The war doesn't end until one side fully loses. In this region. And can resistance ever go away as long as Israel exists? No, but it can win, it can lose, it can reform. The shape shifts, but with an aggressor this vile and destructive, there will never be an end to resistance. And I think your dream of missiles raining down on Israel will be realized in one way or other, because Israel is not sitting back. They've just transferred their attention from Gaza and most of Lebanon to the West Bank. We expect Yemen will be in their sights as well. Their war continues, and we may even find more parties joining this axis, more groupings, as Israel's rampages continue in this region,
I'm just afraid that it's too late for Lebanon, that's it.
Oh, for God's sakes, this place has lived through everything. It has been continuously inhabited for thousands of years. Nobody could get rid of a presence in Lebanon. So let's just watch and convey what we're learning, sometimes just based on the same media our viewers are looking at, sometimes based on sources within and assessments we're hearing from experts privately, but all we can do is bring to you what we're learning moment by moment. So it's probably a good time to wrap up. And I'm sure next week's podcast will be way different than this one's.
And keep your eyes on the West Bank, because it's escalating there. So maybe that should be, people should keep their eyes on the West Bank. For sure.
And don't forget to, of course, share, like, and comment. We read your comments, of course. And see you in the next episode.
And please subscribe to become a paying Patreon member. It means a lot to us and the work we do here at the Cradle. And please hit that bell button on our YouTube page to make sure that you are notified of every one of our podcasts and our Cradle Bites, which is when we report briefly on things that are happening during the week outside of our Monday podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for watching.